Welcome back to the Rent Roll Queen podcast. I'm your host, Tarsi Taylor. Today's episode is sponsored by Rob Honeycomb, Rent Roll Broker and Agency Sales. Are you looking to finance a rent roll transaction? Today we speak with Steve Marinucci from Marra Finance. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, Tarsi. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. So, Steve, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am a finance broker and I specialize just in financing of real estate businesses and rent rolls. So it's, I've only been new into my own business, started at the start of this year, but I've been working with real estate agencies across a couple of different banks for the last 15 years. So I've done hundreds of rent roll transactions that I've funded, but that's pretty much it. So I'm the rent roll finance person.
You are the rent roll finance person, and we've known each other for about 15 years. So The whole time you've been doing this, I've been in the industry as well, and we've been working together on a one-on-one basis, depending on what sort of deals you have had going on in the past. So
definitely.
Let's talk about finance today, because this is huge for business owners, right? Real estate business owners, they want to buy a rent roll or they want to refinance a rent roll. They want to do something with their business. So let's talk about how they can basically structure, or what happens when they first phone you. Like, what are you looking for?
Look, there's probably a few different things that they'll actually call me about. So rent roll financing is the first thing. So like that's when somebody's got a business or wanting to buy a real estate business, they'll call me and say, Steve, I need to buy a rent roll, 300 managements, and I need money, because not everyone's walking around with, a couple of $1 million of spare change in their pocket and saying, I'm just going to go buy a real estate business. There's generally a lot of planning that goes into it. So that could either be somebody buying a rent roll and plugging it into existing rent roll, a totally new business starting from scratch, or it could be a part of a succession play. So it's, and that's what I'm seeing a lot at the moment. As real estate principals are getting older, they're looking at succession. So they're looking at who from within have got the ability and capacity to buy them out in the long term. So I'm doing a lot of that at the moment.
So is that more like the staff are buying the actual business, from like the staff within that business are buying?
Yeah. So it would be somebody who, it might be a good sales agent who's saying, well, look, my principal's approaching retirement and they're looking at getting out. They will come to me saying, look, I need to buy out my principal, and I'll look at various options for them to buying them out. They generally work pretty well because the business continues on exactly as it was. As it has been going. So I'm doing a lot of that at the moment. But it could even be somebody who calls me and says, Steve, I've got a rent roll. I've got no debt on it, and I need to buy the premises I'm in. A lot of people don't understand that their rent roll is something that they can lend against. It's something that has value. It's kind of like if you're got a house and you don't have a loan against it, you can actually borrow against it to do stuff.
Yeah, it's the equity that they're holding, right?
A rent roll is exactly the same. It's just that banks won't lend as much as a percentage compared to like a house.
Yeah, right. Okay. So what are the kind of trends that financiers, or what are financiers firstly looking for? And then what trends are you seeing with the banks?
It's interesting. Most banks play in the space. The thing I'm seeing, and the thing coming out of one bank and being able to access all banks, is that everyone has got different policies.
Yes.
They would lend a different percentage of the value. So like some banks can lend up to 80% of the value of the rent roll. Some may only lend up to 50%.
Yep.
Then you've got other banks who'll say, look, we'll lend you money to buy this rent roll, but we want it to be paid back really, really quick. So some banks might say, we want it back over 7 years. Some banks will say, we want it back over 10 years. And there's some banks that are happy for you not to pay back at all and just pay interest, provided that they'll continually check in with the client, make sure that their rent roll isn't going backwards, because that's the one thing about rent rolls. Rent rolls are a great investment.
They are.
But they are very liquid. So if your property management team can't manage those properties well, the landlords are leaving, they will leave, and that asset value will come back very, very quickly. The other thing to note is with rent rolls, you'll lose about 10% every year. So like you need to continually grow that rent roll to keep that value the same. So banks will check in to see that the debt that they've got against the rent roll is still appropriate to the value of the rent roll. But every bank's different is effectively what I'm seeing at the moment.
You got to keep replenishing everything that you have lost as well, because you want to continue to hold the value of the rent roll. And we are seeing rents increasing as well, which allows that rent roll value to increase at the same time.
That was the biggest saving grace I saw throughout COVID. In COVID, a lot of rent rolls went backwards.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I saw some reports kind of suggesting otherwise, which I disagree with, because a lot of the clients I'm speaking to had gone backwards. The only thing that saved them and saved their rent roll values going backwards through COVID was rising rents.
Yeah.
So they got to keep their margins if they're charging 7%, but their rents went from $400 a week to $600 a week. So they could afford to lose a few properties because they're making it up in income, and rent rolls are always valued on that multiple of income. But now we're coming to a period that rents are starting to stabilize.
They are.
Even in some areas, you're seeing a slight contraction, especially the prestige stuff. And those businesses that were losing properties through mismanagement and getting away with it through COVID, they're going to get caught out pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, and we've seen that kind of happen before. We've both been in this industry long enough to have seen this happen a few times over our course of our career. What are banks actually looking for? Like, you know, if I'm a client that comes to you and I go, hey, I want to borrow to buy a rent roll.
Yeah.
What are they actually like? What do you want? Because, you know,
it's, you know, look, the biggest thing is like, you always go back on this, is the 3 C's of banking. So character being, who are we actually lending to? So what their experience is, you know, are they making enough money to live? Like, are they spending more than they can actually afford? That all comes under character. Like, are they paying their tax? That's the other thing as well. Like, that's something that at the moment, as cash flow gets tight, it's the first thing to go.
Yes.
And the ATO are really cracking down on really anything that's over $100,000 at the moment. They're really starting to make sure that they get their money back. So character, when banks are looking at, they see that they've got a big tax debt, and generally they'll walk away. And
yeah, right.
So that's the first thing. The collateral part of it is, the cash flow is the second thing that they look at. And cash flow is all around, you know, can this business afford to repay the debt that we're actually giving them? And if they can't, that's a problem. So I could lend somebody $10 or $1 million, and if that person who wants to borrow $10 is making a loss, the bank's not going to give them $10.
Yeah.
You know, they could have all the security in the world, but a business that is making a lot of money, their LVR on their rent roll could be extremely high, but we can see the cash flow, and there's a reason for doing it. There will be a bank that will support that person, because cash flows, if they've got good character and the cash flow's there.
Cash flow is king, right?
Cash flows, absolutely. So, and then the last thing they look at is the collateral. So what actually secures the loan? So that could be the actual quality of the rent roll. The amount of times I come across people that are saying that they're buying a rent roll which is scattered all over Southeast Queensland.
Seeing one at the moment,
And the problem with that is, from a cash flow point of view, it may make sense, but you got to remember, and for that business who's just a rentals only business, they could probably put a case forward saying, well, we don't mind managing these properties, some down in Logan, some up at Caboolture, but when you go and sell it, it's going to be very, very hard to sell.
Yeah, there's less buyers for a widespread portfolio versus a closely held one.
And that's simply because the ultimate end user and buyer of that rent roll is going to be a traditional sales and rentals office who will want to increase their market share in that particular suburb that they operate out of.
Yeah.
Why would they buy their potential sales commissions in a suburb 50 kilometres away? Because they'll never get it for sale when their property comes up for sale. And I saw a stat the other day was saying that the average Australian transacts a house every 7 years. If you look at that, well then, if you're buying a rent roll, you buy it because not the recurring income, not just the recurring income, but it's also the sales commission. So when that person decides that they want to sell, they want to get that listing.
Yes.
But if you're an office at Caboolture and you've got a property you're managing at Caloundra, very unlikely that they're going to go with you as an agent to sell that property, because it's not your core market. And the problem is that buyer of that rent roll eventually they'll be like, well, all these commissions I won't get, so why would I buy it? There's not many rental only businesses that are out there. There are definitely
yes.
But that's the thing, is like that buyer will be 90% chance they're going to be a rentals and a sales business.
Yeah. Well, 9 times out of 10, it actually is that way. So you are right with that. And the thing is, what I'm seeing is a lot of people aren't prepared before they're basically wanting to buy a rent roll. It's like all of a sudden they start looking and I'll go, so that's fantastic that you want to buy a rent roll. Have you got your finance sorted?
Yeah.
And then it's a no.
Yeah. And look, a lot of people don't even understand the intricacies of rent roll financing because they may have banked with a bank for, since they were, like the amount of times I've seen, people say that, oh, look, I've had our trust accounts with Commonwealth Bank, for example, and they've gone to them and asked for money and they've said, no, we don't do it. So they just think it's an automatic no. When there are definitely options out there. There's so many banks and they're all, as I said before, with their different appetite around what they can and can't do. It's definitely worthwhile having a discussion saying, well, what bank is the best one to go, for your business?
And before they come to you, what do they need to prepare in order to, before they even come to you for a conversation? Because when you start speaking to people, I can imagine that you'll be speaking to a business owner and they're actually not even prepared for finance.
And that's the thing as well. A lot of times it's something that comes out of left field. It'll be principals become sick. They need a buyer. They knew that this person was a logical buyer, but they hadn't even thought about the process. I do get a lot of them where they come to me and say, look, Steve, I need a solution now.
Yeah.
And they're not prepared. But if you've got a good plan around this is where I want to go in the next 5 years, the amount of conversations I have today that business owners come to me and saying, Steve, I want to be at 1,000 managements. What do I need to do to get there? And they may have just started out their journey. So they don't have any cash behind them to go and buy a rent roll. They may not have equity to go and buy a rent roll, but I'll have the conversation and say, well, you need to demonstrate to a bank that you can, one, grow organically.
Yeah.
Because if you can build a rent roll from scratch and show that you can build your own equity, it gives you the ability then to go and buy more based on, and using that existing asset, your rent roll that you built up organically to go again.
Yeah.
It's the best way to do it because the amount of times I've seen as well where people have gone, you know what, these numbers on this IM from a rent roll broker will come through and say, this business looks fantastic. It's profitable. I don't have any experience in real estate. And I've seen it on a couple of occasions. It only goes one way.
Yep.
And it's down.
Well, I actually have a policy in my business that you've had to work in the industry for at least 6 months and actually know and how to actually run a portfolio before I will even talk to you about the potential of purchasing a rent roll. So,
and I actually had a conversation with somebody the other day, and he was saying, it's like, Steve, I'm going to buy a rent roll for $1 million. I said,
awesome.
Great. And I said, well, how are you going to run it? It's like, I'll just take on the existing staff. I'm like, what happens if that staff member was to leave? So, do you know how to run it? He's like, no.
Yeah.
I said, your best bet is to go and work for somebody.
That's it.
For 6 months, 12 months. And he's like, I can't afford to do that. I'll be taking a pay cut. I said, well, you'll be losing $1 million if you go and buy a rent roll and it disappears overnight.
Yeah.
So would you rather take a pay cut to go work as a property manager and truly understand the industry? And at the end of the 12 months, if you don't like it and work out it's not for you, you've saved yourself a lot of money.
Oh, that's the thing. I have put in people previously where they had no experience, and within 12 months we were selling the rent roll.
Yeah,
because they were like, this is not for me. It was not what I expected. And
they're
so
generally
forth.
people from outside the industry. Look, if you know how to run a rent roll and you know how to grow. You know how to manage people.
Yes.
Manage expectations with landlords and tenants. They are a great business.
Yeah.
And I've seen plenty of people make a lot of money out of it. A lot of rent rolls have started as a back office for a big sales business where it's effectively the Paul cousin of the office. And
that's what I call true organic growth.
But the principal doesn't really understand what is happening. And the amount of times I've seen people go sell their rent roll and they think that their business is this, but it's not.
I can vouch for that.
So it's like, oh, look, I'm making all this money. It's a great business. And then when you start digging a little bit deeper, it's not. So it's something but we are seeing a big revolution in the industry where the business owners are becoming more engaged in property management. because they understand that ultimately is their retirement, their succession.
Yeah, well, it's the asset of the actual business itself. So, and if you're not managing it correctly, like you said, it walks out the door, there goes the value. And then every bit of value that you lose because of that property that has left your agency, that's extra equity that you don't have to borrow another rent roll. And they don't kind of understand that fully.
Yeah, exactly. And look, a lot of times when they go and buy it, they may lose it on the way through retention or whatnot. But you got to remember, you're also losing income every time you lose a property.
Yes.
So it's if you're trying to buy income, and look, I lost 50 properties, but I didn't pay for them. But you also lost over $100,000 a year in income. So they're things that business owners are being a little bit more mindful of.
Yeah, and I think too, it's a conversation, like I know we're going a little bit off track, but they're not having conversations with their property management team to get them to understand that you're not only managing an asset on behalf of a landlord that is X amount of dollars for the landlord, or, when you look over a portfolio, you're basically managing millions of dollars of property.
Yeah.
You're actually managing an asset on behalf of your business owner. So every time that something goes wrong and it's left because of mismanagement, you've just cost your business owner. So say it's making $2,000 per property per annum. Say it's a 3 times multiple. You've just lost your owner $6,000.
Yep.
Right there.
Exactly. But there is definitely more of a focus on property management now. And I was actually at a conference yesterday in Sydney where they were talking about like the role of a property manager being more of a relationship manager, managing that asset for that investor. Because a person will buy an investment property as an investment. It's something that they're putting their equity into, their cash into. And look, everyone talks about the focus on fees and and the reduction of fees. But if you look at the actual true cost of that person holding the property, it's not the 7% that they're paying in management fees. It's the 7% that they're paying on their interest rate on their loan.
Yes.
Making sure that property manager understands that person may have a debt, and that if it's reviewed, and a lot of businesses are now partnering with finance brokers who can help them save a lot of money on their interest expense with their bank. So, but also trying to understand so look, you've got a house that's rented at $400 a week. If you spent $50,000 on it, you would get $500 a week.
Yeah.
Just little things like that. Like that property manager role has evolved. And as a person buying a business, there's a lot of upside if you can do it well.
Oh, 100%. And their rent rolls are a fantastic asset to have because they have reoccurring income, right?
Yeah.
But you've got to also run it correctly. And I just want to quickly touch as well, when we were talking about finance on a rent roll, when they're buying a rent roll, there has to be an understanding too that the bank will actually lend over the total portfolio, the amalgamated portfolio. It's not just the value of your rent roll, it's the value of ours combined.
Exactly. So if you've got a rent roll and you might have 100 properties and that 100 properties is worth $600,000.
Yeah.
When you go to a bank, and I've had this example with a major bank a couple of weeks ago where somebody had walked into their branch and said, I want to buy a rent roll. I've got an existing business and it's 100 managements. And I want to buy another 40 managements. The bank said, no, you can't. We can't lend for this purchase because you're only buying 40 properties and our minimum is 100.
Yeah, right.
So, but that teller, whoever it was at the branch, didn't understand that the policy was more around the combined value.
Yeah.
So that 100 managements might be worth $600,000. That 40 might be worth $400,000. That combined value is $1 million.
Yeah.
The banks will end up to 70% of the combined value of the rent roll.
So you actually can buy a rent roll. It's not particularly around the size.
Yeah.
It's going to be the value overall.
And that's why, going back to what I said earlier, like when people are starting out in business, I always say the most successful stories I've seen over the last 15 years doing this is where somebody can build up organically and leverage the equity in their existing rent roll. So build up to 100 or 200 or 300 organically and then go, Steve, I've hit 300. I found the perfect rent roll that's in my patch for another, and it's 200 properties under management. I'll have 500 combined. And that business is instantly more profitable.
Yeah.
Because they're only paying the interest on that 200 properties that they bought. they may have had to put on another staff member, but the profit goes to the bottom line. That's where you get, where you're not taking on more premises costs. That premises cost already been paid for by the existing business. That's where businesses start to become profitable with scale.
Yeah, well, you definitely have to have the organic growth in your business, whether you're hiring a BDM, which I call, it's not traditional growth. It's basically that you're paying for somebody to be in that seat to drive the growth. But then you've also got buying a rent roll, which will actually add to it. So if you've got the organic growth, like you said, and there's no debt on it and it's all equity, then they can scale quite quickly to get to their goal.
But yeah, as you said before, you always have to have organic growth. I was talking to somebody the other day who was at 200 properties under management, but had been I saw the income month by month was going backwards. And I said, do you really want to buy a rent roll if you're going backwards at 200 properties under management?
Yeah.
When if you go to 400 properties under management, you're going to go backwards quicker.
Yeah. What was the reason it was going backwards though?
See, and this is the thing, they had a lot of investors. This is in a more touristy area, because a lot of investors in that area saw a huge capital growth over the last few years, and a lot of them were selling out. So they were losing a lot of people. They weren't, obviously there was some staffing issues in that business.
Oh, right.
And they were going backwards. So the thing is, if I see a business like that, I challenge the principal and say, well, do you really think that if you're losing 10% every year and you're not replacing, if you double the size of your business, you're going to be losing double the amount of properties. So is it a great investment? I think you need to start looking at your back office first and be comfortable with the ability to be able to grow organically before you go and do anything else.
Well, 100%, because you don't want to be losing them. It's a lot of money to pay back. And it's not only just the actual loan, it's all the interest that you've got to pay. You've got stamp duty and everything else that comes with it.
Exactly. And that's why it's making sure your back office is sorted before you do anything is the number one thing.
Yeah, so if they've got their back office sorted, and we always want them to have their profit and loss statements up to date, that would also be lovely. Because the banks are obviously going to look at that as well. Yeah, so it's pretty much having all your financials in order, not just... Basically, planning is the key to success, right?
Exactly.
It really, really is. And so if they're not planning and they're not getting everything ready, when they come to you and then you start looking at things and you're seeing it go backwards, it doesn't matter what those profit and loss are going to speak for themselves.
Exactly.
You've got an ATO debt, you haven't paid that, and all of a sudden the bank goes, you're not really the type of client I want.
No, and that's the thing. It's like a lot of principals are so busy listing and selling.
Yes.
They aren't really paying attention to their bottom line. And we saw this as well, like in COVID, property management wages went through the roof.
Yeah.
And a lot of principals were just saying, look, we'll give them an extra $10,000 a year just to keep them. The problem is now that those businesses that were profitable through COVID because they were getting JobKeeper, they were getting the sales commissions were going through the roof, they were doing exceptionally well on the sales side. Now property management, which should be that recurring income that keeps the lights on in that office, it's not profitable. So, and that's what should be covering the bills.
Yeah.
But I've seen with a lot of businesses that their profitability has taken a nosedive after COVID because they're left with a rent roll, which is generating similar sort of levels of income, but their expenses have gone through the roof.
Yeah. No, they definitely have. So, and it's not going to get easier because we've got a labour shortage as well, right?
Yeah.
So that hasn't helped with regards to the salaries and so forth that we're paying in the industry, which is enormous in comparison to what it was, 4 years ago?
Exactly. And in the last couple of years, there's been, and I've seen this, there's been a shift to outsourcing is starting to become a much more widely accepted thing in property management, where that non-dollar income producing tasks have been, moved overseas. And that's how a lot of businesses that have combated that wage increase. So and the best time that I've seen when people are doing it is when they're doing acquisitions. So like somebody will be like, look, and there's an example I'm thinking of recently, they're buying 300 or 400 managements and they're going, well, I only need two additional VAs. And that's when it becomes more profitable.
Yeah.
But if you're starting putting on 3 people at $100,000 a year.
Yeah, there goes all your profit out the door. There goes the profit out the door. So you got to be smart.
And I was even like, there's examples where I've seen big businesses at 2,000 that are running on like 10% profit margins because their wage line is so is so big, they've got to have a BDM or two to continually keep that business growing. And they have to look at things like outsourcing to increase their profitability.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing that you just touched on then, right? When you start getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're saying that you can lose up to, say, about 10% every single year through, owners moving in, sale, or just, a bit disgruntled, whatever, and you're losing, that's 200 managements that you basically have to organically grow by every single year to keep on top of just that 2,000 level.
Yeah, it's hard to, especially if you're in an established area.
Yeah.
Say, for example, if you're in the middle of Brisbane, there's not going to be, another 10,000 new properties that are going to come online.
Yeah.
So, which means that those businesses have had to spread out to get new properties, or they're competing on price. So then why? So, we've grown organically, but we've offered all our landlords 5% management fees.
Yeah.
You're not actually making any money out of it.
No, that's right.
So, it's an interesting time right now.
Yeah, but it is food for thought. Business owners really do need to think about it as well. Like the bigger you get, you're going to need a different structure to make sure you're managing and maintaining that portfolio and that growth and keeping at your levels. Whereas, somebody who's smaller and say has 100 managements, you might only lose 10, which is kind of easier to put on because you're sort of doing that through sales anyways.
And I'll look after a business who have got a couple of thousand managements, and their strategy, rather than putting on BDMs, is actually to keep a part of their profit every year and then to go and acquire using that cash that they've kept aside.
Yeah, right.
So that person identified that it was actually cheaper to do it that way because they're a property management only business.
Yeah.
And they will go and acquire small parcels as they come up. So there'll be like another 50. I'll go and buy that. I've got the cash because I've kept a part of my profit out of my existing rent roll. And they have been able to maintain that level by reinvesting back into their business and acquiring managements when they come up. Being a cash buyer as well, they've also been able to negotiate better terms.
Yes.
So, look, you got 50, I'll take them off you at a slightly reduced multiple.
Yep.
And their geographic area is a bit bigger, so they can be a little bit more flexible around which ones they're picking up.
Right. Well, they don't have to go through finance either because they've got the cash that's sitting there as well. So how do trust accounts make any difference to financing? Like, how does it all work together?
It's interesting. Banks won't admit to it, but talking to every single bank, banks make more money off trust accounts than they do off the lending.
Yeah, right.
Especially when interest rates are high like they are now. So they're more interested in picking up your trust accounts than actually doing any loans. So it's one thing as a finance broker, I make sure that the incoming bank, when I'm putting a proposal out saying, look, I've got a client wanting to buy 200 managements, it's $1 million. I actually tell the bank how much their trust account balance will look like. So banks will want your trust accounts for two reasons. One is, because they make more money. And two is because they want to make sure that there is transactions going in, so they've got visibility on how your rent roll is going.
Right.
So that's why all banks will mandate that your trust account has to be with them. It's more of a security thing.
So all the banks are doing that now?
With the exception of one which don't have bank accounts, but they'll just lend you the money. But with all the other banks, if you want to do a rent roll loan with them, your transactional banking, your trust accounts and your general accounts need to be with them. They've got visibility then on, are you paying your tax? Because they'll see in your general account, you've made a $100,000 payment to the tax. Great. But if they see that you're making $5,000 a week payment to the ATO, they'll know that you're probably on a payment arrangement with the ATO and you're behind.
Yep.
So it's because the thing is, when you're buying a house, they'll do a valuation. They'll see that they know that with the market, if the market's gone up 10%, that property is going up in value.
Yes.
But the banks will want to have visibility in your rent roll. And if they see that there's less people putting rent into a trust account, that there's probably something going wrong.
So they're monitoring it from the back end as well.
Yeah.
That's very interesting that they're doing that. And I guess then the next question that I have for you with regards to that is, how many people are swapping banks?
It's the one, I guess, nuance around when changing banks when it comes to real estate is it's hard to change banks.
Yeah.
It's bloody hard.
Yep.
You're telling 1,000 tenants that the way that they're going to pay rent is going to change.
Yeah.
Is painful, just the thought of it. But if it means getting a deal done versus not getting a deal done, they'll probably do it. We're fortunate at the moment that there are a lot of really good payment providers out there that are bank external that will, like, there's software providers that are integrated with different payment providers, and they are great for collecting rent, and they're bank agnostic. So they will be like, look, we'll collect the rent. Tell us where your trust account is, and we'll put the money in there.
Yeah, great.
Which are great. So it means that if you're going from a Macquarie to a NAB, you just tell that payment provider to, instead of putting all the rents that they're collecting into this trust account, into another. But changing banks generally happens when you're doing an acquisition.
Yeah.
Which means you got to tell the tenants anyway that they're paying from the rent roll you're buying, that they've got to change the way that they pay rent anyway. So it's something that people need to be mindful of when they are borrowing. There is going to be a lot of work if you are having to change banks. But I generally try to go to the bank that they're currently with first, because I know the pain involved with having to change all the accounts.
Yeah, no, I've seen it too. So, and, I've been in the back end of businesses where we've done the transaction's all gone ahead, and you're sitting there, 90 days later, still trying to get tenants to pay into the right trust account.
It's painful. But to be honest, it's what we've seen as well is there's an emergence of the trustless account and property management now, which is going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because some banks will mandate that they've got to have their rental trust account with them. But what happens if they don't have a rental trust account?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And no one's really got a very clear, definitive answer on.
Have you done anything on that yet? Have you seen any rent rolls come through with that?
Yes. So there've been a few that have transacted that have gone to businesses that are running with a trustless account, such as like the Colmios, the ALOs, where there is no trust account. So I guess for those businesses, if they're rentals only, and I haven't come across one that has gone trustless that are rentals only, generally the businesses have got probably a bigger sales trust account than they do in rentals. So the banks are at the moment turning a bit of a blind eye to it, saying, well, we're getting the sales trust account anyway, which is making us a lot of money, but they've got no visibility of the rentals, which goes to show they're probably more interested in the money side of it than the actual where the rental payments are going into.
Oh my gosh, there's so much in this. I love this conversation. Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate all your insights. And what I'll do is I'll put all of your details in the caption, and anyone who wants to reach out to you can do so.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Tarsi. Thanks for having me on.